Right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on Overflow today. We hope you had a good weekend and we hope your week is off to a good start. And we're so glad that you could join us. As always, Overflow is focused on reflecting from the sermon from the day before, talking about it, asking some of our life group questions that we have in our app, and just processing what it looks like for us personally in our everyday lives to live out the scripture that we're talking through. And so if you're joining us live, we always love to hear from you. And so feel free to say hi in the chat box and feel free to just mention that you're here. And if you've got any questions or comments, right away. Uh, this afternoon, we have Pastor Juno Smalley and we have Pastor Ryan Bogert and myself. And we'll be just talking through some of our personal life and just recapping the sermon from yesterday. And so, a simple recap basically, we talked through Matthew chapter 1. We talked through the lineage and the history of Joseph and Jesus and their family history. We referenced 42 generations of family history and some key figures in there. But we took a little bit of different approach. We looked at it for sort of the brokenness and the dysfunction in the family lineage, and really to talk about that. We all have a past. We've all got a family that we were born into. We've all got family history, some things that are good and that we're proud of, and some things that are not so good and that maybe we're ashamed of. But God doesn't leave us there. He's always ready to redeem us, to heal us, and to restore us. And we are more than our past. God creates us as a new creation in Christ. His mercies are new every morning. And we have an opportunity as followers of Jesus to live in a God honoring way that might be different than the family we grew up with, or the past that we come from, or even our family history generations behind us. And then we kind of finished off the sermon talking about Joseph's decision to either divorce Mary quietly and go on about his life, or embrace Jesus as his son, embrace Mary as his wife, to be a family, to follow God's plan, and to be faithful to God's call on his life. And how Joseph chose to be faithful to God, even in a wild season that was very uncertain moving forward. And we encourage everyone to really live a life of faithfulness and return to faithfulness, which is the focus of our Advent series right now. What does it look like for us to return to being faithful to God where we may have fallen away? So, with that being said, um, yeah, let's jump into our icebreaker for today. Does that sound good? Alrighty. So, this past yesterday, we discussed family history. What's something that you've learned about your family as you've gotten older that maybe surprised you or caught you off guard when you learned about it?
I have two stories. One's from my wife's family. One's from my family. I think her story is more fun, so I'll start with hers. So my wife's birth name was Sarah Ellen Giovannini, and her middle name Ellen was named after an aunt, and then she was trying to figure out what to do with her name when she got married to me, if she wanted to keep the whole thing or make her last name her middle name or what. And she was talking to her other aunt, and apparently they found out that her, I think it's her great aunt Ellen, had apparently accidentally shot her husband while drinking or something like that. And that was after Sarah got named after her. So that was part of, after that, Sarah heard that story. She's all like, oh, you know what? I'll drop the Ellen from my name. I'm fine with that. uh, so that kind of led her to her name, choosing Sarah Giovannini Bogert as her full name when, that came out. So anyways, that's always a fun story, and she had no idea. And apparently that had happened like when she was a little kid, so they had known, her other extended family had known for years.
Hey,
But
did he die?
I don't think he died.
Okay.
I'm honestly not sure. I would need to ask her, but I
Well,
don't
you better not go out drinking with your wife.
think
Okay.
yeah, I'm all runs into women in their family. No, I'm just kidding. But anyways, so yeah, that definitely caught her off guard, caught me off guard as well. Maybe one story that caught me off guard is most of my family are like, my parents and grandparents are like engineer type of jobs and stuff like that, including aunts and uncles and stuff, or business or something like that. But my great grandfather in Germany was a pastor, and he was a pastor. I think he was like mainly a pastor in the very early 1900s. I'm pretty sure he died before the World War II, but maybe he was alive during World War One. So knowing that runs in the family, and he actually he had a extremely old Catholic Bible from like the mid 1500s that he kept, and we still have that around as like a cool family heirloom. And it's a so anyways, that's a really cool thing. And knowing that, being a pastor in my family goes back at least somewhat, so that's cool.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Very good.
Weren't you telling us something about the mafia or something like that before we started?
Ryan, in his sermon, you mentioned Murray, right? Is that the guy's name?
Maury.
Maury. And I just thought, oh boy, I just watched a movie last weekend that reminded me, probably more than I realized, was The Irishman. Irishman or Irishman? And really about the whole story about Jimmy Hoffa and his disappearance and the mafia. And it's in Michigan, it's in Detroit, 30 minutes from my house. My uncle was with him the week before he disappeared. And it just brought back a boatload of emotion and like realizing that is my life. Not all of it, but that played a significant part. Maybe significance too big of a word. Anyway, it's a part of my background. When I was traveling to churches, my mom said, hey, Moosh can get you a van. He can file off the engine number so nobody will know it's stolen. I says, I am not going to churches with a stolen vehicle, Mom. She goes, nobody will ever know. And it's just, anyway, that's just a little bit of my background. Now in one church in Detroit, I used to say to the staff, now, if this doesn't happen, and I'm going to bring in my Uncle Moosh to take care of a few things. Maybe they resonated more with that idea of the mafia.
Uncle Moosh.
So anyway, but I did over the last, I think 2 years, have found out of some other abusive relationships in my family that have been shared with me. It's just like, you're kidding me. I didn't know that happened. Why didn't someone do something? All those, questions years later. But so I thought that was very interesting as a part of my background. Then as I'm thinking, you know what, all of us, there are probably so many things in our lives, the history in our families that we don't know anything about. And as pastors and as we preach, it's like we don't know the history behind the people in the church. Some of them we do, but there's probably a whole lot more pain and anguish and anxiety than we ever will dream of. If they were able to, again, one of these days, if they were able to text to us anonymously their pains and their deepest hurts and stuff, I think as a church, we would be so much more compassionate to one another because we would know the story behind the person. But anyway, that's not where you're going. But sorry about that, Brian.
I mean, anybody who's got a family member named Uncle Moosh has got to get to know.
His name was Mike, but the I call it the Armenian Mafia. Maybe there wasn't one. Oh, I'm sure there was. But anyway, they all call his name was Moosh. And so, but we all got along with Moosh, Uncle Mike. He was a good guy. Well, according to our standards.
Because the mafia, you take care of your family,
Yeah.
Sounds like they need to make a sequel to The Godfather, about you, called The God Pastor or something.
Yeah, there you go.
God Pastor.
And Juno sort of fits that Mooshi name.
Yeah, there you go.
It's like, you come to me with your sins and I will grant you forgiveness, but you must do me a favor first.
You've been practicing that, Ryan.
My whole life, man. We got some ties to the Sicilian mafia. If you go,
It's people say it's funny when the people go to confess to pastor, all those abusers sort of like disappear off we never see them again.
Wasn't so and so having like an affair with someone and then he died in a car accident?
Yeah, it's like
later.
God is really answering his prayers because all these mean people are disappearing.
And you're the pastor. You hear the confession. You're the only one who knows. Anyway.
I think we just stopped a few people that were watching driving.
that could be an interesting plot for me to say. All right, anyways.
Okay, that'd be a great movie. Hey, we're here in LA. Someone should pick it up.
I know.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just one of those things where learning that, growing up, I saw all my family members as like, oh, Aunt so-and-so and Uncle so-and-so and my grandparents and all these things. And it was always like, positive thoughts or feelings about those relationships. But it's like, as I got older, I found out, oh, this person like doesn't even have their kids anymore. They were taken away. And this person like divorced this person and they had an affair and they left. And, my great grandma came here and as a single mom of 5 because her husband bailed on her. And then so-and-so was in jail. So-and-so's been having drug problems on and off. It's just like, I feel like all these things just kind of unraveled, like kind of once I got 18 and started becoming more of an adult in the family. And you kind of realize like, oh, Uncle so-and-so is this way because they've been through all this kind of stuff, or just a lot of crazy stuff that's like, wow, I didn't know this was a part of my family. Like, how did my immediate family like kind of shelter me from some of my extended family that's been through some wild things? And so it's kind of interesting that way. It's like, this isn't the family I thought I grew up in, but yeah, so I guess that's kind of my thing. Okay, let's jump into some of the questions here. So the first question is that the sermon focused yesterday on the lineage of Joseph and Jesus, their family history, on both the godly and the ungodly actions and activities that their ancestors took. So what sort of history do you come from, and what have been some helpful attributes and some unhelpful ones? And so this is different than just like, hey, what are some interesting things you've learned about your family? But think through the family that you grew up in, and what were some things that maybe were a blessing or had godly character behind them, or that helped shape you in a positive way? And maybe what were some things that you had to overcome, or that you've had to work through, or that you've had to seek healing or redemption for in your life?
I think this maybe is going to be your second question too, but I think when it comes to family history, probably my parents' divorce, I think on one hand was sad, obviously, and everything that happened. The divorce wasn't sad. The divorce was an answer to prayer. It's all the stuff for years before that was not healthy. But what that did is that forced me to go to church, whether it was with my grandma staying with us saying, you better go to that church down the street, or my parents feeling guilty and paying for every youth group thing we ever did because they felt guilty about what was going on. So it's like, let the church deal with this kid. And so I always had money to go on in Michigan, we had canoe trips and winter camping trips. And I always had, money was not an issue for me to go on these events. And so I think the double-edged sword was that, the dysfunction and the pain that you go through as a kid and seeing what's going on in your family. But really that the pendulum swung me to the church. And that's where, and I think I know I've said it before, at least I've written about it. That's where the church became my family. And so that's why I'm so gung-ho and adamant that people are connected to community at the church, because to me, that's almost more important than your biological family, because to me, that was the saving grace in my whole high school experience. And so, is that what you're looking for there, dude?
Yeah. I think I wrote a little bit.
Yeah, and so anyway, yeah, so it's a little bit of a, and okay, the other thing I struggle with through the whole thing is I still feel, I don't know if I do it so much now, but maybe as a pastor, I still feel at times people put me in a box a little bit, that, I don't have a deep history of pastors, and, my grandpa wasn't a pastor, my dad wasn't a pastor, I don't think anybody was a pastor. I'm just thankful I went to church. But anyway, and so I don't fit some of that, what's it called? Family history of just, some would say good stock, so to speak. It's like, no, from age 10, the church was absolutely critical in my faith development. And so that's a very good thing. And until I went to seminary and everybody was bragging about all their relatives in the ministry, it's like, well, God still has called me to this. So.
Yeah. So I think for me, there's a lot of things I think about in response to this question, and I could probably talk about this for the rest of our overflow time. I'll try not to. But for me, in college, I went to counseling, and that helped me work through a lot of issues that I think had come up because of my family situation. I think it helped me emotionally mature a lot and understand my past. And one of my favorite things from your sermon yesterday, Ryan, was talking about how we can identify like the patterns and the cycles in our family history, and also how we can like try to break those cycles and try to like create positive change, and not pass on maybe some of the wounds or issues we had to our kids. And when I think about my mom, she she grew up. I know for a fact that like when I was a little kid, she was never very close with either of her parents, and there was a lot of hurt there for her and a lot of issues for her, and they were just for a lot of reasons not close and at odds a lot and angry at each other a lot, I would say. And my grandma grew up in Germany, and she's a very intense person, and my grandpa was in the military, and I think that's how we met my grandma, in Germany in World War II or something. I'm not sure exactly. But yeah, I just know that growing up, they had a divorce, and there was a lot of issues they passed on to my mom. And my mom, I think always did her best. And it's easier for me to say that now than when I was a kid. Like when I was a teenager, especially when I was, really angsty and fighting back a lot. But I had a lot of intense fights and issues with my mom, and so did my older brother. So our house kind of became a conflict zone a lot during those years. And I think in hindsight, like I've seen how my mom's childhood has affected her and made her the way she is, and how I really think like she's done the best with that she could. Because I always believe my mom's not a malicious person. She's just a flawed and broken person like we all are. And I also think that my mom, also had unique stresses that come with raising a severely autistic son, which was my younger brother, and that also contributed a lot. So I say all that to say that I find myself having a lot of empathy for my mom now as I continue to get older. And I recognize, and she struggles with depression. That's something she's actually started only talking to me about in the last year or two. And I also struggle with depression. A big part of my story is God's really helped me deal with that in a lot healthier way since becoming a Christian. So I've experienced a lot of healing in that area. So I do feel like I am growing. I am breaking the cycle. And I even think to an extent my mom broke some of the cycle. Like my mom wasn't perfect, and I think she had issues as a mom and maybe impacted me negatively in some ways, but I think she was able to do a better job than the generation before her, right? And now I have a lot of empathy for her that she struggled to have with her parents, and I think I'm trying to continue to make it better, as the generations go on. So that's something I was thinking about when you were talking about that yesterday, Ryan. And both in just depression and family conflict, and in having, and hopefully now my kids can have a really good relationship with their grandma and grandpa, because I didn't really have much of a relationship with my grandparents on my mom's side because of that. So anyways, all that to say, like, yeah, it's just like family cycles are real. I think you also talked about nature versus nurture yesterday. I think struggling, I believe that like chronic depression might be a nature thing in my family, but it's something that I can be aware of and try to help my kids through if they deal with that one day in the future. Anyways, so it's a lot, and all of those things make can make following Jesus challenging at times, but I find myself growing through it. And I think that God has really shaped it so that there is growth and there is healing in our family tree. And I know for a lot of families, they get into wait, let me think before I say things. Sometimes I talk before I think. Um, I know that there can be patterns like my mom of like conflict and negativity that play themselves out, even patterns of like abuse in families. Often people who are abused end up becoming abusers. So it's really important to identify those issues and to try to work and grow from them. And I think that I see that happening in my own family. And we talk about Jesus in your sermon yesterday, having negative people like, people who are not super moral or awesome in his family tree. We all come from a broken past. Even Jesus comes from a broken family line, and all we can do is live out our best life and try to do our best to break those cycles. And I'm sure there are issues I'll pass to my kids too, but hopefully I've done my best to break the cycle as much as I can and give them a healthy environment to grow up in, and in the rest of their worlds, in the rest of their life, and as they go into the world at someday. Anyways, that was the short version. Like I said, I could talk about this until 12:35, but yeah. So that's a lot of the thinking I've done in my family history the last 5 to 8, 10 years.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we could talk about this a lot as we really evaluate things. One of the things I really appreciate about my parents is I feel like they were very intentional to want to create a family with values that maybe they didn't grow up with or things that they didn't have. So both my parents grew up pretty poor, and very small homes, lots of kids, not very much possession wise or opportunity wise. And they both really wanted to have a family one day that they could, that would not be without. And so they've worked very hard to provide that. They both had homes where they would not bring a friend over ever, ever. And they wanted to have homes where their kids, or a home where their kids could bring friends over, which we definitely had. We became known as the house that everyone hung out at, and lots of my friends came over and slept over and lived over for quite some time. And so they wanted us to have opportunities. And so there's a lot of good things that I think we experienced growing up, my siblings and I. But my parents had to be very intentional, like you were talking about, Ryan, to break some of that bondage. A few generations of my dad's dad and his granddad, alcoholism was a huge issue, and there's been some big health issues in my mom's side of the family that a lot of people are dealing with and struggling with that are hereditary. And there's definitely been some attitudes that have come down from that have really affected my parents and our family. But choosing to really make some changes, I think, is really important. And as we're talking about following Jesus, I think one of the most important things we can do as a Christian that is often left undone is really look at our history and our family history and our upbringing to understand why we are the way that we are and to make some changes. There are just some people who, even though the Bible says to be generous, they just cannot be generous for the life of them. And I think if they go back through their family history, you can kind of see, well, there's a lot of hoarding mentality developed out of some of the things they experienced. As I look at kind of my own life, one of the big themes I have in my own life is independence. And so I was an only child for about 4.5 years before my brother came, and then a few years later my sister came. But in order for my parents to provide all the opportunity that they wanted for us, they worked a lot. And so I remember growing up, and at 5 a.m, I'd wake up at 5 a.m, and I'd get taken to a babysitter's, and I'd go to babysitter's for a few hours before school. Then I'd go to school. Then after school, I went to the daycare program, and I was there usually until 6. They closed at 6, and I was often picked up at like 6:05 or 6:10 or 6:15. I was like always the last one. And so
that's why you're always late. No,
family cycle.
Time in my family is very different. It's like, oh, the party starts at 4. That means at 4 o'clock we start thinking about getting ready to go to the party. So Um, yeah, that messed me up too. But anyways, so growing up, it was like I just became very independent and very detached because I was not home very much. I didn't see my family very much, and I was already kind of an independent kid. My parents say my favorite phrase was "No, I do it by myself," and that's become my daughter's favorite phrase now. But so I was
That
already
nature or
very
nurture, Ryan?
a little bit of both, probably. Um, but it's interesting looking back and just now as like a 33-year-old guy, I still have a hard time depending on people or like connecting with people. So much of me is still very independent and is very, I do it by myself and I don't need help. And that's just something that is ingrained in like the depth of my being that I have to be aware of. And in order to follow Jesus, it's like there's so many one another's in scriptures. We got to depend on one another, be in relationship with one another, support one another, love one another, serve one another, depend on one. Like there's so many one another's, and that just goes against not just my ideology, but just like how I was raised and what I grew up with. And so, in order for me to follow Jesus, I need to acknowledge what I've grown up with and how I've been formed. And I need to be intentional to work against that. So I have to be intentional to reach out to people, to share my burdens or questions or concerns, to be there for others, to let other people be there for me, and all sorts of stuff like this. And so that's just like one kind of specific thing I think I've experienced when it comes to following Jesus, and something I'm kind of working through and overcoming. Um, but I feel like there's like 1,000 directions we could kind of take this question of stuff that is in our family history or is in our experience growing up, and that affects how we are and how we follow Jesus.
Yes, and piggybacking on yours when you mentioned not bringing people home when your parents. Well, through my parents' divorce, that's the way it was with me. But yet it was the people in the church that had the gift of hospitality that welcomed me that made the difference. And that's why, again, I think I preached about it a little while ago, the idea of hospitality. And some are saying that that's the lost art, the element that is missing in our many churches' outreach endeavors, because nobody wants to bring people home. They want it all done at the church. Not nobody, many people. But I was influenced by sharing meals with people and just seeing Jesus alive in that family, which filled in the blanks and the gaps and corrected things in my life with my family. It was wonderful. So anyway, but yeah, when you shared that, it's like, yep, that's why I still believe it's important to invite people over. So anyway.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I feel like we could go so many directions, and that was just kind of the first question for today. Um, but really, the focus of this sermon kind of landed with the two questions that we left the sermon off with, and the first was, what's something from your past that God wants to heal, or redeem, or make whole again, and how could we journey with God on that? And the second question is, what's something that maybe we've lost sight of or lost track of that we need to return to when it comes to faithfulness to God? And so those are two things that we want to encourage everyone to be processing this week. And I guess I just kind of want to open it up to us for our last few minutes. Is there anything that any of you guys would say on either of those two questions?
Okay, I hope I'm going the right way again on this. Again, I'm pretty adamant that if I hear of those triangular relationships, someone doesn't like something and they come to me, it's like, no, you need to talk to them. Or people who are divisive, oh, I don't like the color of the carpet and and then they just keep spreading their opinion around and then becomes divisive. And I think some of that goes back for years in some different churches, just seeing people's lives destroyed by divisiveness and that gossip. And so that's why I'm pretty big on it, trying to get people to talk it out. Okay, we can disagree, but understand that we've disagreed. And if you continue to talk it out in unhealthy ways, then you're being divisive. And then that can't be a part of the church, And so I don't know. That's where it's that balancing of it's okay to disagree. We have got to disagree. There's no way we're not going to disagree. It's just how you handle that. And I think it's reteaching and reframing that for many people. It's okay to disagree. We talked about loving your enemies a few weeks ago. It's like, I can disagree with you. It doesn't make you my enemy. And yet I think growing up, at least in that season when it was either mafia or just, if you didn't agree, it was a bad thing. And no, it's okay to disagreement's okay. It's healthy. It's biblical. It's just how you handle that. And so that's a constant internal dialogue that I have as I'm in ministry.
Yeah, I like that you said that we need to be able to like disagree with each other and not become enemies. I feel like there is such division and polarity, and anything gets presented. I feel like so much of social media. I've even seen family members. One posts something very extreme this way, and another family member responds with something very extreme in the opposite, and it's just like this huge fight. And it's just like, how can we walk through different opinions and not be divided over these things?
Right. Now, growing up Armenian, that was constant. The very verbal, very verbal disagreements, but that they still loved each other. And so what I've realized, though, is people aren't comfortable with those verbal disagreements and still loving. Is you've had the verbal disagreements, and now it's that rotten, no good person. And it's no like, oh, no, we're okay. We just disagree. He's the loser. And you trash talk them in love, but you move forward knowing that, okay, we disagree on this. Yeah. That was a big part of growing up, but I don't see that a big part of the church often.
Yeah. And I will say really quick, I have a story that relates to that. I know a young person, I won't give an age range or anything, whose grandparents left the church, and they were just changes or something that they didn't like, and they kind of became bitter about it. And when I talked to this young person, I saw their grandparents' bitterness reflected in them, and they didn't even know why their grandparents were bitter. They don't even have reasons. It's just because it was rubbed off on them from their grandparents. So I think we just need to be careful, because even if there is some hurt we have, or we feel frustrated about something like that, hey, yes, like you said, it's best to talk about it directly and address those things head on. But also, do we want to be the type of people, when we're bitter or we're angry or we're negative, do we want that rubbing off on other people? Like a grandkid who doesn't even know why, doesn't even have actual reasons other than they sense bitterness from their family. So it's just, it's interesting to see, because it just really shows how much we impact the people around us. And the person who this was, I've never seen them bitter or negative like that at all. That's not really their personality. It just kind of came through their familial experience directly from them, because that person isn't really bitter about anything that I've seen them in terms regards to how they relate to other people in church or anything like that. Anyways, so I want to give one final word thought that I meant to mention earlier, but I didn't get the chance to. We all talked about our family history in different extent. And if you are a life group leader, or just you're in a life group and you're listening to this, I think the best things that can happen is in life group is really talking deeply about our family issues. And if you as a life group leader do that, it might encourage other people in your life group to talk deeply about their family issues, and things that they've had to wrestle through. And sometimes those topics can be kind of taboo a little bit, but I think, I kind of tell my youth leaders sometimes, hey, make sure you answer this question really well, because it'll set the example for the students and how they respond. Anyways, and I think that's where the best discussions could come out of a life group meeting, talking about these questions this week. Anyways, this is a thought I had that I meant to mention earlier and I didn't. So
yeah, good thought.
Mm-hmm. And to say that our past does influence us. It doesn't define us, but it also doesn't give us the excuse for being a jerk. It
Yep.
influences us, but it doesn't give us an excuse to continue in the bad behavior. And I think sometimes people will, they use, well, that's just how I grew up. And you're just going to, no, okay, you be aware of that, but not be intentional to make a change. So,
Yep, I totally agree. I think we've got to use our past as awareness and understanding why we are the way we are so that we can submit it to the Lord and
Yep.
be fresh and healed and redeemed. Yeah, not as an excuse. We're not trapped by our past, but some of us have been through some pretty tough things that it's going to take some time to work through. It doesn't just change overnight. But I really do believe that God wants to redeem the whole person. He's not just interested in people that can say, yep, Jesus is Lord. Okay, I'm good. I get to go to heaven. I think God really wants to heal us and make us whole and to surrender our whole lives to him to be made new and healed and restored. So, yeah, well, good thoughts today. Thanks so much for joining us on Overflow. Glad you're with us. I hope this was helpful and encouraging and just getting you on the off to the right foot. There's definitely so much to process and talk through when we really look at the life we grew up with and the family and our history and what we've experienced and what God might want to be doing. So try to focus on even just one or two things this week that God might be highlighting in your life in this season that he wants to you to be attentive to and that he wants to work through and heal and redeem. So thanks again for joining us. We'll catch you next week, Monday at 12 on the Overflow. Have a good day.